He wasn't supposed to be there. A man carrying a tool bag, wearing a faded jacket, walking through a hallway full of dead security guards. And not one of the armed men pointing guns at billionaires and executives even glanced at him twice. That was their first mistake. Their last one came 11 minutes later. Adrian Cole hadn't thrown a punch in 4 years. He had promised his daughter he was done with all of it. The darkness, the blood, the version of himself he buried somewhere overseas and swore never to dig up again. Tonight, someone else made that choice for him. If this story already has you hooked, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very end. Let's get into it. The call came in at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, which Adrian would later think was the most ordinary detail about one of the worst nights of his life. "Security panel on sub-level 2 is throwing errors again," said the voice on the phone. A facilities coordinator named Doug, who always sounded like he was reading from a script he didn't write. Same system as last month. "You available tonight?" Adrian was standing in his kitchen, reheating leftover pasta and half watching his daughter Mia draw something at the table. She was 7 years old and deeply committed to a picture of what appeared to be either a dinosaur or a very large dog. He hadn't decided whether to ask. "What time?" 7:30. "Building's got a big event on the upper floors, so they need the panel working before—" "I'll be there." He hung up before Doug finished the sentence. It wasn't rudeness. Adrian just didn't need the rest of the information. He knew the building. He'd worked the Halston Tower twice before, once for a fire suppression retrofit, once for a camera alignment job on the executive floors. Clean building, good wiring, expensive everything. He looked at Mia, who had not looked up from her drawing. "Mrs. Grayson okay to stay late tonight?" Mia finally lifted her head. She had her mother's eyes, dark and focused, the kind that noticed things. "Is it a long job?" "Couple hours." "She makes me go to bed at 8:30. "That's because you should be in bed at 8:30. You let me stay up till 9. I'm your dad. I'm allowed to be irresponsible." Mia considered this seriously. "Okay, but can you bring back something from the vending machine?" "Depends what's in it." "Peanut butter crackers." "Done." He kissed the top of her head, called Mrs. Grayson, grabbed his tool bag, and left. The lobby of Halston Tower was doing what expensive lobbies always do when something important is happening upstairs: performing. Extra staff at the front desk, carpet runners that weren't there last month, the particular kind of quiet that comes from people trying very hard not to look like they're working. The event was on floors 31 through 33, some kind of product announcement. Adrian had caught pieces of it on the news earlier in the week without really listening. Victoria Halston was unveiling something big. There were words like revolutionary and industry-defining being thrown around, which in Adrian's experience meant either it was genuinely impressive or someone was terrified it wasn't. He signed in at the security desk, clipped his contractor badge to his jacket, and took the service elevator to sub-level 2. The security panel was exactly where he remembered it, tucked into a utility alcove behind the backup generator room, a gray box the size of a refrigerator that controlled access credentials for the lower 3 floors. The error log told him what he needed to know in about 45 seconds. A moisture intrusion in the relay board, probably from last week's plumbing work 2 rooms over. Fixable. Tedious. The kind of job that required patience more than skill. He set his bag down, pulled out his diagnostic tablet, and got to work. For a while, the only sounds were the hum of the generators and the faint echo of his own tools. Adrian had learned to like silence. It hadn't always been that way. After he left the teams, after everything that happened in the 18 months before he left, silence had felt like a threat, like something hiding in it. He used to sleep with the TV on, used to check the windows before he could sit down in a room. Mia cured most of that, not because children are quiet, but they absolutely are not, but because her noise was safe noise. It had no agenda. When she was screaming because she dropped her ice cream or laughing because something on a cartoon surprised her, it meant the world was working the way it was supposed to. He had spent 4 years building exactly this, a small life, an honest one. He was halfway through replacing the relay board when the sound changed. It was subtle. Not an explosion, not shouting, just a shift in the building's rhythm. The ventilation system stuttered. Somewhere above him, a door slammed with the kind of force that's different from careless. Then another. Then a sound that Adrian's brain identified before the rest of him caught up. A sound he had not heard in 4 years but recognized the way you recognize your own name. Gunfire. Suppressed. Multiple sources. Upper floors. He stopped moving. His hands were still. His breathing slowed without him deciding to slow it. Some part of him, the part he thought he'd buried, was already counting. Already thinking. Suppressed weapons means planning. Planning means numbers. Numbers on an upper floor during a high-profile event means the target is the event. He picked up his phone. No signal. He checked the building's internal comm line on his tablet. Dead. The panel he was currently fixing was one of the systems that fed into emergency communications, which meant either the attack was already sophisticated enough to take out multiple layers of infrastructure, or someone inside the building had helped them get that far. Adrian sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he stood up, left his tool bag where it was, and took the stairs. He didn't go up fast. That was the first instinct most people would have. Run toward the sound, figure out what's happening, help. Adrian had learned a long time ago that running toward a sound you don't understand is how you become part of the problem. He went up 1 floor, found a stairwell window, and looked out into the main corridor of sublevel 1. 3 men, black tactical gear, no insignia, moving in a formation that told him everything he needed to know about their training level. Not rent-a-thugs, not desperate. They moved like people who had done this kind of thing before, slow enough to be controlled, fast enough to stay on schedule. They were carrying zip ties. That meant they wanted prisoners, not casualties, at least for now. Adrian pulled back from the window and kept climbing. Shut. Floor 6 was where he found the first body. A security guard, young, maybe 25, with a Halston Tower patch on his shoulder, was slumped against the wall near the elevator bank. Still breathing. Taser, Adrian guessed, or a tranquilizer of some kind. No blood. They were being clean about it, selective, methodical. They have a target and they don't want complications. He kept moving. The main event space was on 32. He took the service stairs, slower, but the kind of slow that keeps you alive, and stopped at the door to floor 31, which was where the pre-event reception had been held. He cracked it open 2 inches. The room had been converted into a staging area. 6 people, guests, staff, 2 members of what looked like Halston's personal security detail, were seated on the floor along the far wall, hands zip-tied in front of them. 2 guards stood watch. The guests were doing what guests do in these situations, trying very hard to disappear while sitting completely still. The guards were talking to each other in low voices. Adrian listened. Confirmed on 33. She's in the main hall. How many with her? 4. Reyes has 2 from the door. Timeline? 12 minutes. Werner wants the package before, the other guard shifted and Adrian lost the rest of it. But he had what he needed. Werner. A name. Possibly the lead, possibly just a reference point. 12 minutes. The package was the real target, not the people. And Victoria Halston was on 33 with a reduced guard. He let the door close silently. Here is where Adrian Cole would tell you. If he were the kind of man who talked about these things, which he wasn't, that he made a deliberate decision, that he weighed the options and chose the right path, that would be a lie. The truth was simpler and less comfortable. When the door closed, he was already moving toward 33, and the thinking came after. The decision had been made somewhere in the 4 seconds he sat still in the basement, before he even fully understood what was happening. There are people who are built for certain moments, shaped by years of training and experience and things they'd rather forget, and when those moments arrive, the body moves before the mind votes on it. He'd promised Mia he was done with this. He was going to have to apologize for that later. The service corridor on 32 connected to a utility access point on 33, a narrow passage used for event setup, running cables, moving equipment between floors without interrupting guests. Adrian had mapped it during his camera alignment job 3 months ago, not because he expected to need it, but because mapping exits is something that never fully switched off. He came out behind a temporary partition that had been set up to divide the main hall, decorative, fabric-covered, the kind of thing that exists to make a room feel more intimate for a presentation. He moved along the edge of it, staying low, taking inventory of the room through a small gap. The main hall was large, set for 200 people, most of whom were now seated in clustered groups under the watch of 4 armed men positioned at the corners. The attackers had spread out well. Each one had clear sight lines on multiple exits. The room's own layout, the round tables and the low lighting and the small stage at the far end had been turned into a containment tool. Victoria Halston was on the stage. Adrian recognized her from press photos. Tall, late 40s, the kind of composure that takes years to build and usually comes with a few scars underneath it. She was standing with her arms crossed and her jaw set, listening to a man in tactical gear who was speaking to her in the particular tone of someone who considers themselves in complete control. She was not cooperating. Her body language made that clear. And the man speaking to her, Werner, Adrian guessed, based on where he was positioned and the way the other 3 kept glancing at him, was starting to run out of patience. 2 of Victoria's personal security guards were on their knees near the stage steps, disarmed. One had a split lip and was holding very still in the way that means you've already tried something and it didn't work. Adrian counted 4 active attackers in the hall, 2 in the stairwell on 31, 1 unknown at the elevator banks. 7 total that he'd confirmed, possibly more. His tool belt had a flathead screwdriver, a small wire cutter, a voltage tester, a pen light, and a folding utility knife. He'd worked with less, so he didn't attack. Not yet. Attacking 4 armed men in an open room with a crowd of civilians is how people die, including the civilians. What he did instead was disappear further into the partition corridor and start thinking about the room's systems. He knew this floor. The main hall on 33 had 2 things that most people in it right now weren't thinking about. An aging HVAC manifold directly above the center of the room that vibrated the lighting grid when it cycled, and a secondary fire panel on the east wall that was connected to the same relay board he'd been repairing in the basement. The moisture intrusion hadn't just thrown errors, it had left that panel in a compromised state. If he could get to the east wall junction box, he could cycle the fire suppression test mode. Not the actual suppression, just the alarm. The hall lights would cut to emergency red. The ventilation would close. The speakers would trigger. 4 armed, trained men in a room full of panicking civilians in the dark. They'd been doing this clean. Clean meant they didn't want chaos. Chaos was the one thing they weren't prepared for. He moved. The east wall panel was behind a catering station, which was currently unoccupied. The catering staff had been moved with the other staff groups, a detail that told Adrian the attackers had been thorough about clearing service personnel. They didn't want witnesses behind them. He crouched behind the station, opened the panel, and looked at the board. The damage from the moisture intrusion was more extensive than he'd realized from the basement diagnostics. The secondary relay was completely corroded. He could trigger the alarm, but it would likely cascade, pulling the signal back through the main panel and potentially resetting access credentials on every secured door in the building. Every door, including the stairwell doors, which were currently held in a locked position by the attacker's access override. He stared at the board for a moment. That works better, actually. Tell me about the Meridian files. Werner's voice carried across the hall, low and steady, with the kind of patience that isn't real patience, but is actually controlled anger. Walk me through the access structure and we walk out of here without this getting messy. Victoria looked at him. You're already past messy. You're a smart woman. Smart people understand when the math has changed. The math. She repeated it like she was tasting something bad. 30 armed federal agents are going to walk through those doors in about 20 minutes. That's the math I'm working with. Werner smiled. It didn't reach anything above his cheekbones. Your communications have been dark since 7:42. No one called anything in. My assistant called before you cut the lines. I watched her do it. She was bluffing. Adrian couldn't tell if Werner could tell she was bluffing. But it was buying time, and time was what he needed. He made the connection. The alarm hit the room like a physical thing. The tone, the light shift, the sudden red wash across 200 frightened faces and 4 men in tactical gear who had been operating in a controlled environment and were no longer in one. The stairwell doors clicked. All of them. And Adrian was already moving. Whoops. What happened in the next 4 minutes is the kind of thing that's hard to describe without it sounding planned, which it wasn't. It was adaptive. It was ugly in places. It involved a fire extinguisher from the catering wall, a tablecloth used as a tripline between two chair legs, a screwdriver applied with considerable force to a very specific pressure point on a human arm, and one moment where Adrian genuinely was not sure how it was going to go and only found out after. He didn't move like an action movie. He moved like someone doing math in real time, where the math involved rooms and angles and how many seconds it takes a trained man to reorient in red emergency light while a fire alarm is screaming. The answer, it turned out, was enough seconds. When the alarm cut out, reset by the cascade, exactly as Adrian had predicted, the hall was quiet in the specific way that comes after something loud. 2 of the 4 attackers were on the floor. One was zip-tied with his own restraints to a chair leg, which Adrian had found quietly satisfying. The 4th had gotten to the east stairwell and was gone. Victoria Halston was standing at the edge of the stage. She was looking at Adrian. He became aware, in that moment, of what he probably looked like. $45 worth of contractor jacket, a Halston Tower visitor badge that was slightly crooked, a screwdriver in his right hand. No particular expression on his face because he was still in the part of his brain that didn't do expressions. The 2 security guards from her detail were on their feet, disarmed but functional, looking between Adrian and the door like they were trying to figure out what had just happened. One of them, the one with the split lip, said, "Who the hell are you?" Adrian looked at him. "I was fixing the security panel in the basement." He paused. "I'm going to need to fix it again." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. "There are more of them," she said. It wasn't a question. 3 confirmed on 31. 1 unaccounted for, probably at the elevator banks. He looked toward the east stairwell. "And the one who just left this room. Can you—" She stopped, started again. "Are you—" "Ma'am," Adrian said, and his voice was very calm, which he knew sometimes bothered people in situations like this, but he couldn't help it. "The stairwell doors are unlocked right now. That's not going to last. We need to move the civilians to the west corridor and establish a defensible position before whoever is running communications on their end realizes something went wrong in here." Victoria blinked. Then she nodded, once, sharply. "Tell me what you need," she said. He already had a list. The west corridor was a service hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and old ductwork, which made it the least glamorous place Victoria Halston had stood in years, and also, at this particular moment, the safest. Adrian moved the civilians fast but without rushing them, which was a distinction that mattered. Rushing people in crisis made them trip, made them cry, made them freeze in doorways and ask questions that nobody had time to answer. Moving them with purpose, speaking low, pointing clearly, letting them feel like they were following a plan instead of running from a threat, kept their feet working. He'd learned that in a different life, in places where the difference between those 2 things was sometimes the difference between everyone going home. The west corridor connected to a secondary kitchen on 33 and a locked storage room that had a reinforced door, which Adrian had noticed during his camera job, because the door's magnetic lock was on a dedicated circuit that wouldn't be affected by the access cascade he'd triggered downstairs. It was still locked. Their side. "In here," he said, and held the door while 41 people filed through. Guests in formal wear, catering staff in black uniforms. A woman who was still holding a glass of champagne she hadn't put down since the alarm went off. Victoria was last. She stopped in the doorway and looked at him. "You're not coming in. Someone needs to watch the corridor. That someone being you, with a screwdriver. I also have a wire cutter." She didn't laugh, but something shifted in her expression. "That's not funny." "I know. Go inside. There's a staff phone mounted near the loading dock intercom. Old landline, different circuit than the main system. Try it. And if it works, then call anyone. Building management, the police, a pizza place, I don't care. Just get a voice on the other end that isn't in this building." She held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. "What's your name?" "Adrian." "Adrian." She said it like she was filing it somewhere. "Don't get shot." "I'll try." She went inside. He pulled the door until he heard the magnetic lock engage, then turned back to the corridor. The problem with the 4th attacker, the one who had disappeared into the east stairwell, was that Adrian didn't know where he'd gone, which meant he had to think about where he would have gone. Men in tactical situations who break position don't run randomly. They go somewhere useful: communications, reinforcements, or the primary objective. The primary objective was Victoria. He just watched her go into a locked room, which meant the fourth man was either getting help or going for the communications array, which Adrian knew from the building schematics was on the roof access level. A small equipment room that housed the building's cell repeaters and external antenna links. Cutting those would explain why his phone had no signal. Restoring them would be someone's priority if the operation had gone sideways enough that they needed to call out. He moved to the east stairwell door, cracked it, listened. Footsteps above him. One set moving up. He followed. Stairwells are bad environments for most people. Enclosed, echoing, limited cover. Adrian had spent a significant portion of his 20s in environments specifically worse than stairwells, which gave him a different relationship with the geometry. He took the stairs fast and quiet, staying on the outer edge where the structure absorbed more of the sound, and he was 3 floors up before the footsteps above him stopped. He stopped too. A door opened. Roof access. The footsteps crossed from echo to open air and went quiet. Adrian waited, counted to 10. Then went up the last flight and put his hand flat against the roof access door, feeling for vibration. Nothing. He pushed it open 2 inches. The roof was wide and dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city below and the red blinking of antenna markers at the edges. The equipment room was a gray concrete block 20 yards from the door, and the fourth attacker was crouched at its junction panel, working fast with what looked like a splice kit. Restoring communications. Adrian had guessed right. The problem now was that the man had 20 yards of open roof between them, which meant no cover and no approach that didn't involve being seen. And unlike the chaos of the main hall, where Adrian had worked with noise and confusion and red light, up here it was quiet and cold, and the man would hear him coming. He looked around the rooftop. There was a ventilation stack 6 feet to his left, a satellite dish mount at his 9 o'clock, and the antenna array, which ran along the north parapet in a line of 4 units connected by a heavy cable that ran directly past the equipment room. Adrian picked up a piece of loose gravel from the rooftop surface. It was everywhere, the kind of flat gray stone that gets used as ballast, and threw it at the satellite dish mount. It hit with a sharp metallic clang. The man at the junction panel spun toward the sound, which put his back to Adrian, who was already moving. It wasn't graceful. Adrian slipped on the gravel on his 3rd step and nearly went down, caught himself on the antenna cable, kept moving. The attacker turned back around just as Adrian reached him, and the next several seconds were close and unglamorous and involved Adrian taking an elbow to the jaw that would leave a bruise he'd explained to Mia as a work injury, which was technically true. The man was good. Better than the ones in the hall. Faster. He got one hand free and went for a secondary weapon at his hip, and Adrian had to commit to a hold he didn't particularly like, exposed, leveraged wrong, and grind through it until the man stopped fighting, which felt like longer than it probably was. He zip-tied the attacker's wrists to the antenna cable with the man's own restraints, checked him for additional weapons, 1 handgun, a ceramic knife, a comm unit, and sat back on the gravel, breathing. His jaw hurt. His left knee had hit the roof surface at some point and was complaining loudly. He sat there for maybe 15 seconds, which was longer than he should have. Then he picked up the comm unit and listened. Otto. The channel was encrypted but active, which meant someone was still broadcasting. He couldn't decode the transmission, but he could hear the rhythm of it. Clipped, terse, the cadence of a command structure getting anxious. Whoever was running this operation from outside the building knew something had gone wrong. The timing was off. The check-ins were late. He keyed the comm unit once, let it click, released it, listened. Silence on the other end for 3 seconds. Then, Reyes. Status. Adrian said nothing. Another pause. Reyes, confirm position. He set the comm unit down, picked up the man's handgun. A 9mm, safety off, 7 in the magazine from the feel of it, and looked out over the city. 33 floors down, the street was ordinary. People walking, a food cart, 2 taxis waiting at a light. Nobody down there knew that anything was happening up here, which was somehow the strangest part of all of it. He went back inside. Well, the corridor outside the storage room was clear. He knocked on the door. 3 short, too long, which he'd told Victoria before she went in, and waited. The lock clicked. The door opened 6 inches and Victoria's face appeared in the gap. She looked at the gun in his hand, then at his face, then at the gun again. "There's blood on your jacket," she said. He glanced down. Small amount, from the elbow to the jaw. "Not mine." She opened the door wider. He stepped inside. The storage room held approximately 41 people in various states of shock, which gave it the quality of a waiting room at the world's worst airport. Some people were sitting on the floor. A few were crying quietly. The woman with the champagne glass had finally put it down. One of Victoria's security guards, the one without the split lip, whose name Adrian still didn't know, was standing near the landline phone on the wall, and when Adrian entered, he said, "Line went through. Police are mobilizing. ETA somewhere between 12 and 20 minutes. 12 minutes. Adrian did the arithmetic without meaning to. There were still at least 3 attackers on 31, assuming none of them had moved. One on the roof, secured. The one who'd left the hall was the 4th. That was 4 down from the 7 he'd counted, which left 3 unaccounted for on a floor below them, plus whatever Werner was doing now that his operation had started coming apart. "He'll move her," Adrian said, half to himself. Victoria, who had been watching him with the focused attention of someone used to reading rooms, said, "What?" "Werner, he knows something went wrong up here. He's lost communications, he's lost people. The police are coming." He looked at her. "His objective is the Meridian files. You said that he asked you about them specifically." Victoria's expression changed in a way that was small but significant. "You heard that." "What? I was behind the partition." She was quiet for a moment. "The Meridian files are part of the announcement. The actual data package, the core of it, is stored on a server unit in my private suite on 34. It's air-gapped, no network connection. You'd need physical access. So if he can't get you to give him the credentials, he needs the physical drive." She said it flatly, like she'd already done this math and didn't like where it landed. "Suite's 1 floor above us. How many people know the layout up there?" "Anyone with access to the building's event plan. It was filed with facilities management 8 weeks ago." She paused. "Which means anyone who had enough time and the right contacts could have gotten it." Adrian looked at the guard with the split lip. "What's your name?" The man blinked, like the question surprised him. "Carver. Daniel Carver." "Carver, how many of your team are still active?" "I had 6 on this event. 2 in the lobby. I don't know their status. 3 on 32 when it started. I haven't had contact since." He said it evenly, but his jaw was tight. "And Marcus, who's standing next to you." "That's what I've got." Marcus, the other guard, nodded once, confirming his own existence in a way that was almost grimly funny given the circumstances. "2 guards, a screwdriver, and a handgun," Adrian said. "And me," Victoria said. 3 people looked at her. "I'm not staying in a storage closet," she said, with the specific tone of someone who has made a decision and is done discussing it. "That's my data, my company. And if Werner is going up to 34, I know that suite better than anyone in this building." Adrian considered arguing. He considered it for about 2 seconds, which was enough time to recognize it would be a waste of both their time. "You stay behind us. You don't make decisions without telling me first. And if I tell you to get down, you get down immediately. No questions." "Agreed." "I mean immediately." "I heard you the first time, Adrian." He looked at Carver and Marcus. Carver had his empty holster and a letter opener from the desk behind him, which was not ideal. Marcus had produced a collapsible baton from somewhere, which was better. "Stairwell access to 34s through the east corridor," Adrian said. "Same stairwell the 4th attacker used to go to the roof. He's secured up there, but his friends might have come looking. We go quiet, and we go fast, and we don't stop for anything that isn't a locked door." He looked around the room at the 41 remaining civilians. "Everyone else stays here. Door stays locked. You don't open it for anyone until you hear police in the corridor." A man near the back, 50s, suit, the kind of face that belonged in a boardroom, raised his hand slightly. "How will we know it's police?" "They'll sound like police," Adrian said. "You'll know." He turned toward the door. "Stop." The east corridor on 33 was empty, which either meant they were clear or meant the remaining 3 attackers had moved up, and the lack of sound from the stairwell suggested it was the former. Adrian led, Carver behind him to the left, Marcus to the right, Victoria directly behind Carver. Standard enough for people working without a plan, or rather, working with the skeleton of a plan that they were building as they moved. The stairwell door opened clean, 1 flight up. 34 was Victoria's floor, the private level that wasn't on the public building directory. Suites, a boardroom, a small server room, and the kind of quiet that came from expensive soundproofing. Adrian pushed through the door to the floor and stopped. The corridor was dark, not emergency light dark, completely dark. Someone had pulled the floor's circuit, manually, which meant they'd been in the electrical closet at the end of the hall, which meant they'd arrived ahead of them. He felt Victoria put her hand on his jacket from behind. Not grabbing, just contact. He understood it. He raised the handgun and moved left along the wall, using the edge of the baseboard as a reference line, the way you do when the only reliable thing in a dark space is the floor. 20 feet down the corridor, he could see the faint glow of a screen. Someone had a device open inside one of the rooms. The server room door was ajar. Light coming from inside. He stopped the group with one hand back, palm out. Voices inside, 2 of them. He caught fragments. Can't crack the secondary without her credentials. The whole point was, Werner said use the backup extraction. The backup extraction takes 40 minutes and we have maybe 10. A third voice, lower, cutting the other 2 off. Enough. Get the physical unit. We take the drive. We move. Werner. He was already inside. Adrian turned back to the others and leaned close to Carver's ear. 3 in the server room. Werner's with them. They're going for the drive. He paused. When I go through that door, you keep Ms. Halston at the end of the corridor. You do not follow me in. Carver's eyes were difficult to read in the dark. You're going in alone. Yes. Against 3. The room's small. Small rooms change the math. Carver looked like he wanted to argue, which was reasonable, but he nodded. Victoria caught Adrian's arm as he turned. He looked at her. The server unit, she said quietly. It's the one with the blue indicator light. Left rack, second shelf. It has a physical extraction lock. You need to enter a code before you can pull it. Without the code, it triggers a wipe. What's the code? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, which was the hesitation of someone who had never told anyone this particular number in their life. 891. He looked at her. She held his gaze. My daughter's birthday, she said. She would have been 23 this year. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. He just held the information carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else, and turned toward the door. The server room was 12 feet by 18, which is not a big room to begin with, and with 3 men and 2 rack units and a narrow access aisle, it was smaller than it looked on paper. Adrian had the door open and was inside before any of them registered the movement, which gave him approximately 1.5 seconds of advantage, which was about what he needed. Werner was at the left rack when he turned. He was a compact man, 50 or so, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something harder. He looked at Adrian with the rapid, assessing look of someone who had done dangerous work for a long time, and his hand went to his weapon. Adrian shot the light fixture. The room went dark. Darkness is a tool. Like any tool, it works better for whoever is more comfortable holding it, and Adrian had trained for a long time in environments with no light, which is a miserable experience when you're doing it in a training context and genuinely useful when you need it. He moved by sound, the shuffle of feet, the intake of breath, the slight mechanical click of a safety being disengaged in the wrong direction. And the next 90 seconds were the ugliest of the evening and the hardest to describe without making them sound like something they weren't. He took a hit to the ribs from someone's elbow that was going to hurt for a week. He lost the handgun somewhere in the second exchange. It skittered under one of the rack units, and he didn't have the angle to go for it. He ended up in a 3-way situation that he got out of through a combination of leverage and one very specific technique that his instructor had called brutal and effective, and had taught him anyway. When the emergency lighting finally kicked in, the floor's circuit reset from the building's backup, 3 minutes after someone had pulled it. Werner was on the floor with his hands secured behind him, using a network cable. One of his men was unconscious against the far wall, and the third had gotten out the door at some point during the dark, and Adrian hadn't been able to stop him. He stood in the server room breathing through his mouth because his ribs made deep breathing a project, and looked at the left rack. Blue indicator light, second shelf. He found the keypad, entered 040891. The lock released with a soft mechanical click. He left the drive in the rack, locked it again. Took the keypad cover off with his wire cutter and removed the interface module, which meant the lock couldn't be cycled again without tools. Then he went to the door. Victoria was at the end of the corridor, Carver and Marcus flanking her. She looked at his face in the emergency lighting. "Werner," she said. "Inside." "The drive?" "Locked. I took the keypad module. Nobody's pulling that unit without the physical key and a replacement interface." She exhaled. It was a careful exhale, controlled, but he could see what it cost her to hold the rest of it back. "The third man got out," he said. "We need to move everyone to the lobby level. Police are coming, and a loose attacker in a building with civilians is still a problem." "I know." She straightened. "I know. Let's go." They went. The third attacker was found 17 minutes later by the first police unit to breach the building, hiding in a maintenance closet on 28 with a sprained ankle and no particular desire to continue his evening. He was the least dangerous person in the building by the time they found him, and nobody was more aware of that than he was. Adrian was sitting on the lobby floor when the police came through, his back against the reception desk, his jacket off, his head tipped back against the desk's edge. Carver had insisted on looking at his ribs, which was unnecessary but hard to argue against when the alternative was standing up. Somewhere in the building, he could hear Victoria talking to someone. Efficient, precise, the voice of a woman who had been through something terrible and had already started processing it into information. He thought about Mia. He thought about the peanut butter crackers he had promised her and had not gone near a vending machine to retrieve. He thought about the look on Werner's face in the half-second before Adrian had shot out the light. Not fear exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has just realized he has made a significant miscalculation about the situation he is in. A police officer crouched in front of him. Young, early 30s, with the wired energy of someone responding to their first major incident call. "Sir, are you injured?" Adrian thought about his jaw, his ribs, his knee. "Not seriously. Can you tell me what happened?" He looked at the officer. "I came to fix a security panel," he said. "It got complicated." The officer stared at him. "I'm going to need more than that," he said. "I know," Adrian said. "I'll tell you everything, but I need to make one call first." The officer hesitated, then handed over his personal phone. Adrian dialed Mrs. Grayson's number from memory. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear the television in the background, some home renovation show with an enthusiastic host. "Mr. Cole, everything all right? Job ran long," he said. I'll be a couple more hours. Tell me I'm sorry about the crackers." A pause. "She fell asleep at 8:45, didn't even ask about the crackers." "Good," he said. "That's good." He handed the phone back and looked up at the lobby ceiling, which was very tall and very expensive and currently reflecting the blue-red pulse of police lights from outside. His ribs ached. His jaw ached. The version of himself he had spent 4 years trying to retire was sitting in his chest like a coal that had not quite gone cold. He had known it was still there. He had just been hoping it wouldn't matter. Tonight had answered that question in a way he wasn't sure how to feel about yet. The police took 4 hours. That was the part nobody tells you about in situations like this. The aftermath, which is longer and colder and more exhausting than the thing itself. Adrian sat through 2 separate interviews, one with a detective named Reyes, which struck him as a coincidence until he remembered the name from the comm unit on the roof and realized it wasn't a coincidence at all. It was just a common name, and his brain was still running threat assessments on everything. And one with a federal agent who introduced herself as Supervisory Special Agent Cho and had the particular energy of someone who had been pulled from dinner to deal with this and was being professional about it. He told them everything in the order it happened. He didn't editorialize. He didn't explain why he'd made the choices he made because they hadn't asked about motivation. They'd asked about sequence, and sequence was something he could give them cleanly. The gun he'd taken from the roof attacker was logged as evidence. The comm unit went into a labeled bag. When Cho asked about his background and he told her, Navy SEAL, 8 years, honorable discharge, she wrote something in her notebook and didn't ask the follow-up question, which he appreciated. At some point, someone brought him coffee in a paper cup that was too hot to drink for 15 minutes and then too cold to enjoy. He drank it anyway. It was past midnight when Victoria found him. She came through the lobby with 2 members of what appeared to be a crisis management team flanking her, both of them talking at once, and she was nodding at them with the focused patience of someone who has learned to absorb information from multiple directions. When she saw Adrian, she stopped walking, said something quiet to the 2 people beside her, and they peeled off in separate directions like they'd been waiting for permission to leave. She sat down next to him on the bench near the reception desk, not across from him, next to him. He noticed that. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Your ribs, she said finally. Paramedics said probably bruised, not broken. She recommended ice and ibuprofen. Did you take either? The ibuprofen. Victoria was still in the same dress she'd worn to the event, deep charcoal gray, the kind that was clearly expensive without announcing it, and it was now wrinkled in ways it definitely had not been at 7:30. And there was a small tear at the left sleeve she probably wasn't aware of. She looked tired in a way that went past the physical. The specific tired that comes from having your sense of safety dismantled and then having to be composed about it in front of 100 people for 4 hours. They got Werner talking, she said. Cho told me. He's cooperating. That was fast. Apparently he has opinions about whoever hired him, and those opinions are stronger than his loyalty. She paused. It wasn't random. The timing of the event, the details of the suite layout, the access information. Someone gave them all of it. Someone inside your organization. Yes, she said it without flinching, which told him she'd already processed the anger portion of that realization and was now somewhere past it. They're still working out who. Werner won't give a name yet, just enough to confirm it was internal. She looked at her hands. I keep going through the list. People I trusted for years, running through conversations in my head, trying to find the one that felt wrong. You probably won't find it that way. I know. She exhaled. I know. It's just what the brain does when you can't turn it off. He understood that. He understood it more than he wanted to. Go home, he said. Sleep, even if it doesn't come easy. This part, the figuring out, takes days. You don't do it tonight. She looked at him sideways. Is that what you did? After whatever you went through before this? He considered the question. No, I did the opposite. Sat with it for months before I figured out you can't think your way out of something like this. You just have to let time do most of the work. That's not a very satisfying answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. He got home at 1:15 in the morning. Mrs. Grayson had fallen asleep on the couch with a blanket over her legs and a home improvement show still running on low volume. He woke her gently, paid her double the usual rate, and walked her to her car. When he came back inside, the house had the specific quiet of a place where a child is sleeping. A different kind of quiet than empty buildings or empty rooms, something that had weight and warmth to it. He checked on Mia. She was on her back with one arm thrown over her head, which was how she'd slept since she was a toddler. The dinosaur or large dog drawing was on the nightstand, and she'd added to it since he left. There were now 2 figures next to the animal, one tall and one small, holding hands. He stood in the doorway for a while. Then he went to the kitchen, put ice in a dish towel, pressed it against his ribs, and sat at the table in the dark. The coal in his chest was still there. The one he'd been aware of since the lobby, since before that even, since the moment in the stairwell when his body had started moving before his conscience had voted on it. It wasn't guilt exactly. It wasn't satisfaction either. It was the complicated thing in between, the thing that had no clean name, the thing he'd been carrying since he left the teams and never fully put down. He had hurt people tonight. He had done it deliberately, efficiently, without hesitation. And those people had been hurting others, had been armed and dangerous, and actively in the process of taking something they had no right to. But none of that made the mechanics of it clean. It just made it justified. Those 2 things could both be true, and the distance between them was where the complicated thing lived. He sat with it until the ice melted and the dish towel was just a cold, wet cloth in his hand. Then he went to bed. The next 3 days had a strange texture to them. Mia knew something had happened. She was 7 and perceptive in the way some children are, a radar that picked up on the things adults try to smooth over. He told her there had been an incident at the job site and he had helped some people and had bumped his ribs, all of which was true, and none of which was complete. She accepted it with the particular seriousness she brought to information she wasn't sure what to do with yet, and then asked if he wanted her to draw him a get well card, and he said yes, and she spent 45 minutes on it at the kitchen table with her tongue between her teeth. The card had a person with a bandage on their ribs, a sun with a face, and the words, "Get well." Dad spelled out in letters that varied significantly in size. He put it on the refrigerator. The news coverage was extensive. He watched some of it and then stopped watching it because the coverage had the quality of something being told by people who hadn't been there, which was their job, and he understood that. But the version of events they were building had cleaner edges than what he remembered. Words like heroic and extraordinary kept coming up in relation to an unnamed contractor who had intervened, and each time he heard one, he felt a small, uncomfortable friction, like a shirt tag rubbing against the back of his neck. His phone rang 12 times in the first 2 days. Reporters, mostly. He didn't answer numbers he didn't recognize, and the ones who left voicemails used words like exclusive and opportunity, which told him everything he needed to know about what they wanted. A former teammate, a man named Desmond, who Adrian hadn't spoken to in 2 years, called to say he'd seen the news and figured Adrian was involved somehow, and if he needed anything, the offer was left loose enough that it could mean a lot of things. Adrian called him back, said he was fine, and they talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, which was what he'd actually needed. On the third day, a car he didn't recognize parked in front of his house. He watched it from the kitchen window for about a minute before the door opened and Victoria Halston stepped out, alone, which surprised him. She was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a coat, the kind of deliberately low-key outfit that people who are usually photographed in formal wear choose when they don't want to be photographed. She looked at the house, and then at the car, and then up and down the street with the particular awareness of someone who had just spent 3 days being told they needed more security and was now without any of it. He opened the front door before she could knock. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was holding a paper bag from a deli 2 miles away, which he knew because he'd been there 100 times and recognized the logo. "I asked around about the neighborhood," she said. "Someone mentioned you like the corned beef from Heller's." "Someone being who?" "The building directory. You listed Heller's Deli as your emergency contact once, apparently." He stared at her. "That was a joke. I filled that form out at 2 in the morning. Well, it was either the deli or a blank space, so I made assumptions." She held out the bag. "Can I come in?" He stepped back from the door. The kitchen table was the only clean surface in the house, which he was aware of as she sat down and he put the bag between them. The rest of the house had the honest disorder of a single parent who prioritized other things over tidiness. Mia's shoes by the back door, a stack of mail that needed sorting, a half-completed model of something on the counter that Mia had declared a joint project, and then lost interest in halfway through. Victoria looked around without comment, which he appreciated more than he would have appreciated a compliment. He made coffee. It was the thing to do with his hands. "They identified the source," she said. "Inside the company. A man named Garrett Fenn, Executive Vice President of Operations. He's been with me for 11 years. Adrian set 2 mugs on the table and sat down. 11 years is a long time. I hired him out of a consulting firm in Boston, watched him build an entire division from a budget and a half-empty floor plan. He was at my company's 10th anniversary dinner." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "He had access to everything. Event schedules, suite layouts, the server room specs. He fed Werner's team the entire blueprint." "What did he get out of it?" "The Meridian data. If Werner had extracted it and sold it to the right buyer, Fenn had a cut arrangement, enough to disappear and start over somewhere." She paused. "He'd already booked a flight. Interpol flag caught it." Adrian thought about the woman in the storage room holding a champagne glass, the guard with the split lip, the 41 people who had been sitting on the floor of a locked room while this played out. He knew about the civilians. He knew about the event. He knew there would be 200 people in that building. Her voice was level, but her jaw was tight. So yes, he knew. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. "For what it's worth." The kind of betrayal that comes from someone you trusted for that long. It's different from a stranger doing you wrong. It sits in a different place. Victoria looked at him. You sound like you know what that's like. I do. She didn't push it. He was grateful for that. I came because I wanted to ask you something, she said. And I wanted to ask it in person because it's the kind of question that deserves a face. He waited. I'm rebuilding the security structure for the company. From the ground up. New protocols, new personnel, new oversight. The whole thing needs to be torn down and put back together by someone who actually understands what went wrong. She held his gaze. I want that person to be you. The coffee mug was warm in his hands. He looked at it. I fix security panels, he said. You do a great deal more than that, and we both know it. Miss Halston, Victoria. He said it carefully. What happened the other night? I didn't plan that. I didn't execute it cleanly. I lost a gun. I let one man get out of a room. I slipped on rooftop gravel like an idiot and nearly went down. It worked out, but worked out is not a professional standard. You kept 200 people alive with a screwdriver and some knowledge of how a building's electrical system works, she said. I'm not asking for perfect. I've had perfect. I paid for an entire team of people whose resumes were excellent and whose performance on that night was nearly fatal. She set her mug down. I'm asking for someone who thinks the way you think, who reads a room and finds what everybody else missed. That's not something you put on a resume. It's either there or it isn't. He was quiet for a moment. I have a daughter, he said. She's 7. Her schedule is not negotiable. Then we build around it. And I'm not going back into the field. Whatever this is, it's structural work. Systems, training, oversight. I'm not a weapon for hire. I'm not hiring a weapon. I'm hiring a mind. She paused. And a person with enough integrity to make one phone call to check on his kid before he talked to the police. That part mattered to me. He looked at her. She held the look without flinching. I need time to think about it, he said. That's fair. And I need to understand the full scope, not a pitch. The actual state of what you have now and what's broken about it. I want documentation, access logs, the incident report from that night in full detail. I can have all of that to you by tomorrow. Then I'll have an answer by the end of the week. She nodded and picked up her mug again. They sat for a moment in a quiet that was different from the quiet in the storage room or the stairwell. It was an ordinary kitchen quiet, with the refrigerator humming and the sound of wind against the window and Mia's get well card on the fridge door in the corner of his eye. Your daughter drew that? Victoria asked, looking at the card. Yes. She spelled well with 2 L's. She knows how to spell it. She was being emphatic. Something moved in Victoria's face. A complicated thing, quick, that she didn't try to hide but didn't fully show either. He thought about what she had told him in the server room. The code. Her daughter's birthday. The past tense in it. He didn't ask. Some information is given once and shouldn't be asked about twice. She sounds like a good kid, Victoria said. She is, Adrian said. She's the best thing I've got, Chad. He thought about the offer for 3 days. He thought about it while he drove Mia to school, and while he finished the Halston Tower job. They still needed the basement panel repaired, which he found darkly funny, and the facilities coordinator Doug called him back as if nothing had happened, because Doug's relationship with the building was fundamentally about the building and not what happened inside it. He thought about it while he stood in Mia's school pickup line and while he sat in the parking lot of the grocery store for 10 minutes because he couldn't remember what he'd gone there for. What he kept coming back to wasn't the job itself. It was the question underneath it. He had told himself for 4 years that the decision was made, that the man he'd been, the one who could walk into a dark room and function, who read threat patterns the way other people read body language, who knew the weight of a 9mm by feel and could calculate angles and distances without thinking about it. That man was retired, decommissioned, shelved in the interest of raising a kid and sleeping through the night. Thursday night had been clear about one thing. That man was not retired. He was just waiting. And waiting for what, exactly, was the question Adrian had been avoiding. Carver called him on the second day. It was unexpected. He'd gotten the number through Halston Tower's security desk, which was either initiative or an overreach depending on how you felt about it, and Adrian hadn't decided yet. I wanted to apologize, Carver said. For what? For standing in that corridor while you went into a room with 3 armed men by yourself. A pause. That was wrong. I should have found a way to back you up. You were protecting Victoria. That was the right call. Maybe, but it didn't sit right after. Another pause, shorter. I've been doing executive protection for 6 years. I've never seen anyone move through a situation the way you did, not even the guys I trained with who came out of the military. He stopped. I just wanted to say that. You don't have to do anything with it. Carver. Yeah. You got those civilians to the storage room. You kept your head. You followed instructions from a man you didn't know in the middle of a crisis without wasting time arguing about it. Adrian paused. That's not nothing. Most people can't do that. Carver was quiet for a moment. Victoria asked me to stay on. Help rebuild the team. Are you going to? Yeah, I think so. A beat. She mentioned she'd asked you something too. She did. And? Adrian looked out the kitchen window. The street was ordinary. A neighbor walking a large, slow dog. 2 kids on bikes. An afternoon that had no interest in being anything other than itself. I'm still thinking, he said. He made his decision on a Thursday evening, which was 1 week after the night he hadn't planned to be anything but a man fixing a panel. Mia was at the table drawing again. She had moved on from the dinosaur or dog to something that appeared to be a city, rendered in crayon, with considerable detail in the buildings and very little structural accuracy, which he found charming. He called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. Adrian. I'll take it, he said, under the conditions we discussed. Schedule flexibility, structural role, no field operations without my explicit agreement and a full briefing. And I want Carver involved. He's got good instincts, and he needs someone to train with who pushes him. Done. And one more thing. Name it. I want it in the contract that the job is protection. Not offense, not intelligence gathering, not anything that puts me back in the business of going after people instead of keeping them safe. I'm not interested in being a weapon again. I spent a long time being very good at that, and it cost me more than I want to add up. He said it evenly, but it was the most he'd said about any of it in a single stretch, and he felt the weight of it afterward. A silence on the other end that wasn't empty. It was the silence of someone taking something seriously. Understood, Victoria said. I mean that. I know. He looked at Mia, who was adding a tiny figure to the roof of one of her crayon buildings. A small person standing up there looking out at the city. I'll be in Monday morning. I'll have the documentation ready. And Victoria. Yes? The code you gave me, he said. The server lock. I never told anyone. Not in the interviews, not in the documentation. I logged it as a physical extraction module removal. The number stays with you. Another silence. Longer. Thank you, she said. It came out quieter than her usual voice. Something in it that she wasn't trying to perform. He said goodnight and hung up. Mia looked up from her drawing. Was that work? Yes. New job? New job. She considered this. Is it dangerous? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about what honest looked like at 7 years old, when the world was mostly still the size of a classroom and a kitchen table and a neighborhood with slow dogs in it. I'm going to try to make sure it isn't, he said. She seemed to accept that. Turned back to her drawing, added a few more strokes to the small figure on the roof. What's that building? He asked. It's a tall one, she said, with the completeness of a 7-year-old who sees no gap in that explanation. He looked at the figure she'd drawn on the roof. Tiny. Standing alone up there. Looking out. He thought about Werner's face. About Carver standing in the dark corridor. About 41 people in a locked room who had gone home to their lives without knowing most of what had happened to get them there. About a code that was a birthday, offered in a server room by a woman who carried her losses quietly and still got up every morning and ran a company and made decisions and kept going. He thought about the coal in his chest, which was still there but had changed somehow. Not smaller, not gone, but differently shaped. Like something that had been burning in one direction for a long time had shifted and was now burning a different way. Not clean, not resolved, but different. He got up, went to the refrigerator, and pulled out 2 pieces of leftover pizza, which was not a nutritionally appropriate Thursday dinner, and which Mia celebrated with a quiet but sincere fist pump. Some things, Adrian had learned, you don't resolve. You just carry them differently. And you eat pizza on a Thursday and let your kid draw cities on the kitchen table. And you try, as much as a person can, to keep the ordinary things ordinary. Monday morning arrived the way Monday mornings do when you've made a decision you're not entirely sure about, with complete indifference to your internal state and a traffic jam on the interstate that added 22 minutes to a drive he'd estimated at 35. He dropped Mia at school first. She had a field trip permission slip that needed signing, and he'd forgotten about it until she mentioned it in the car, so he signed it on the steering wheel at a red light while she watched with the mild judgment of a child who knows better than to say anything. He handed it back. She looked at his handwriting. "It's crooked," she said. "It's signed. That's what matters. Ms. Peterson is going to know you signed it in the car. Ms. Peterson can call me if she has concerns." Mia tucked the form into her backpack with the careful resignation of someone who has accepted the limitations of the people around them. "Are you nervous?" she asked. He glanced at her. "About what?" "New job." He thought about it. "A little." "That's normal," she said, with the authority of someone who had started second grade 4 months ago and considered herself experienced. "I was nervous on the first day of school. It went okay." "Thanks," he said. "That helps." She got out of the car, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and walked toward the school entrance without looking back, which was something she'd started doing recently, the not looking back, and which he found simultaneously healthy and quietly gutting. He sat at the drop-off line for an extra 10 seconds, watching her go. Then he drove to Halston Tower. The building looked different in daylight without a crisis in it. The lobby had been restored to its usual self. The carpet runners were gone, the extra staff replaced by the ordinary weekday configuration, the particular performance of normalcy that expensive buildings are very good at. There was no visible evidence of what had happened on a Thursday 8 days ago, which was either impressive or unsettling depending on how you felt about surfaces. The woman at the front desk gave him a visitor's pass and a smile and directed him to the executive elevator, which went directly to 34. He rode it alone. The elevator had mirrors on 3 walls, which he had always found to be an aggressive design choice, and he spent the ride looking at his own reflection with the same mild discomfort he always felt in mirrored elevators, which was that he looked like exactly what he was. A man in a decent but not expensive suit who had bought it 3 years ago for a different occasion and had not worn it since. The doors opened on 34. Victoria was waiting in the hallway with a coffee in each hand, which struck him as a gesture that was both practical and personal, the specific combination of things that turned out to be characteristic of her. "You're 7 minutes late," she said. "Traffic, and my daughter needed a permission slip signed." "Was it crooked?" He stopped, looked at her. "Why would you ask that?" "I have a face that makes people tell me things. It's useful professionally and occasionally annoying personally." She held out one of the coffees. "Come in. I want to show you what we're working with." Bye. The conference room on 34 was where the documentation was laid out, and the documentation was extensive. 3 weeks of internal security audits from an outside firm Victoria had brought in 2 days after the incident. Incident reports from the police and the federal investigation. Personnel files for every member of the security team, including the ones who had been sidelined during the attack. Floor plans, access logs going back 18 months. A detailed breakdown of the communications infrastructure and exactly where it had failed. Adrian sat with it for 2 hours without saying much. Victoria worked at the far end of the table, on her laptop, doing the kind of quiet executive work that doesn't require conversation. She refilled his coffee once without asking. He noted that she didn't hover, didn't prompt him, didn't try to pre-interpret what he was reading. Most people in her position would have. It's a control reflex, filling the silence with framing, so the information lands the way you want it to. She didn't do that. She let him read. It was the right call. He respected it. At the end of the 2 hours, he closed the last folder and sat back. "Your access credentialing system has 3 structural problems," he said. "The first is that access tiers are assigned by role, not by need, which means everyone at Fenn's level had physical access to floors they had no operational reason to be on. The second is that there's no behavioral monitoring. Access logs are kept, but not reviewed in real time or cross-referenced against anomalies. Fenn's swipe pattern in the 6 weeks before the attack would have shown a significant deviation from his baseline. Nobody was looking. And the third? Your security team was organized around visible deterrence, uniforms, presence, the appearance of protection. But visible deterrence only works on opportunistic threats. Anyone who planned this operation for long enough, and they planned it for at least 2 months based on the comm equipment they brought in, was never going to be deterred by someone in a uniform. He paused. You had guards, not security. There's a difference. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Tell me the difference. Guards manage the perimeter. Security understands the interior, the people, the patterns, the places where the plan fails before it starts. Guards respond to what's already happening. Security prevents things from happening in the first place. He looked at the folders between them. Your team had zero intelligence function. No one was asking who had access to the event layout 6 weeks out. No one was cross-referencing vendor credentials. The attack walked through the front door using information that someone should have flagged as a leak weeks earlier. She was quiet. Then, can you fix it? I can build something that works better. Whether it's fixed depends on whether the people running it understand why it exists. He looked at her directly. The technical side is the easy part. The hard part is culture. You have to have a team that thinks about threat from the inside out, not the outside in. That takes time, and it takes the right people, and frankly, it takes leadership that's willing to hear bad news early instead of reassurance late. I've never liked reassurance, Victoria said. Ask anyone who works for me. I believe you, but your organizational structure rewarded it. Fenn spent 11 years telling you what worked. If he'd also been the person flagging what didn't, he wouldn't have had the access he did. He said it without softening it, because softening it would have been dishonest. That's not a criticism of you. It's how most organizations function. But it has to change. She took that in without flinching. What do you need to start? Carver, full-time. He knows the building and the existing team, and he has the right instincts for the personnel side. Access to the full 18 months of logs, not the audit's summary, the raw data. A direct reporting line to you with no intermediary, because if I have to go through an operations VP to tell you something is wrong, it'll arrive shaped by whatever that VP wants you to hear. He paused. And 3 weeks before I present any formal structure, because I want to observe before I design. I'm not going to tell you how to fix something I haven't watched in motion. Victoria studied him for a moment. Most consultants come in with a plan on day 1. Most consultants are selling something. I'm not selling anything. He met her eyes. I'm trying to make sure what happened 8 days ago doesn't happen again. That requires me to actually understand what you have before I tell you what to build. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the conference room windows, the city was doing its mid-morning thing. Traffic moving, buildings sitting in the flat winter light, the ordinary business of a world that didn't know or care about what had happened in this building. 3 weeks, she said. You observe. Then you present. Yes. And if you find something that needs immediate attention during those 3 weeks, then I'll tell you immediately. Observing doesn't mean ignoring. All right. She extended her hand across the table. Welcome to Halston Group, Adrian. He shook it. Her grip was firm, and she didn't hold on longer than necessary, which told him something about how she treated agreements. Thank you, he said. Now I need the raw access logs and a desk that isn't in the middle of the main floor where everyone can see what I'm reading. She almost smiled. I'll find you something. The something turned out to be a small office on 32 that had been used for storage and still smelled faintly of the carpet cleaner from the post-incident restoration. It had a window that faced the neighboring building's ventilation units, which was not a view anyone would describe as scenic, but it had a door that closed and a lock that worked, and enough space for a desk, a chair, and the considerable volume of documentation he was working through. Carver showed up on Tuesday morning, knocked on the open door, and leaned against the frame in the manner of someone who had been wondering whether to do this and had decided to do it before he talked himself out of it. Settled in? He said. Enough. Close the door. Carver came in, closed the door, sat in the single extra chair. He was in a suit today, rather than the tactical gear of the event night, and it changed his silhouette, but not the way he held himself, careful, watchful, The particular stillness of someone who spent professional time being responsible for what might happen next. I read the audit report, Adrian said. It's not flattering. No, the team response time on the initial breach was 40 seconds over protocol. The elevator lockdown wasn't initiated. Sublevel 2 communications were never checked as a backup after primary went dark. He looked up. What was happening on the event floor at breach minus 30 minutes? Carver's jaw moved slightly. Final guest check-in. My attention was on the door. Who had eyes on the service entrance? Martinez. She was one of the 3 on 32. She was the first one tranquilized. I know. The service entrance was where they came in, Carver. It's in the incident report. Werner's team used a vendor credential that Fenn had generated 3 weeks prior. The credential was in the system. It was valid. It just shouldn't have been. Adrian set the folder down. If someone had been cross-referencing active vendor credentials against the event's confirmed vendor list that day, they would have found a name that didn't match any confirmed vendor. Carver was quiet for a moment. We didn't have a protocol for that. I know. That's what I'm saying. Not your fault. The protocol didn't exist. I'm trying to understand which gaps are training and which are structural because those require different solutions. He looked at him. I'm not building a case against your team. I'm trying to understand what you need. Something in Carver's posture shifted. Not relaxed exactly, but less defended. The team is good. Most of them. Heller's been with the company longest. She knows the building better than I do. Park is sharp on the technical side. She caught the camera alignment issue on 29 before the audit did. What we didn't have was anyone thinking upstream. We were all downstream people. Reactive. Yes. That's going to change. Adrian picked up a legal pad. I want to spend this week with each of your team members individually, not performance reviews, conversations. I want to know how they think, not what they know. Can you set that up without making it feel like an interrogation? I can tell them you're getting oriented. People talk more when they think they're helping. Exactly. Adrian wrote something on the pad. And I want you to start pulling camera footage from the 30 days before the incident. I'm specifically looking for access to sub-level 2, the East Service Corridor, and 34. Anyone who wasn't supposed to be in those areas. That's going to take time. I know. That's why we're starting today. Carver nodded slowly. Then, can I ask you something? Go ahead. On the night, in the server room. He paused, choosing the words carefully. How do you function like that in the dark? Literally. I can't see my hand in front of my face and I'm basically useless. You cleared 3 people. Adrian thought about how to answer that. Badly, he said finally. Carver blinked. What? I functioned badly. I lost a weapon, I took hits I should have avoided, and 1 man got out of the room. In a training assessment, that would be a failing performance. He met Carver's eyes. It worked because the environment was disorienting for them too, and I had 1 more second of adjustment than they did. That's it. It wasn't skill, it was half a second of advantage I manufactured and then spent as fast as I could. He paused. Anyone who tells you combat performance is clean and skilled is either lying or describing training. The real version is messy and lucky, and you count what worked and you don't talk too much about what didn't. Carver was quiet for a moment. That's not what it looked like from outside. It never is. That's why people develop the wrong ideas about how it works. He picked up his pen. Which is exactly why what we build here can't depend on someone having a night like that. Systems fail. People fail. The structure needs to catch the failure before it becomes a crisis. That's the whole point. He went back to the legal pad. Carver stood, got the message, and moved toward the door. One more thing, Adrian said without looking up. That woman with the champagne glass. From the storage room. Carver turned. What about her? Do you know if she's okay? I've been thinking about her. She never put that glass down. Carver considered this. I can find out. Don't make it weird. Just, if it comes up. Sure, Carver said. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, she works in PR on 26. I saw her in the lobby last week. She looked fine. Good, Adrian said. Thanks. The 3 weeks moved differently than he expected. He had anticipated resistance. The particular resistance that comes when an organization knows it has failed and is not sure it wants to be told exactly how. He'd seen it before, in a different context, when after-action reviews landed on teams that had been through something traumatic and were not ready to hear the clinical version of what went wrong. There was grief in failure, even when nobody died, and grief made people defensive before it made them receptive. What he found instead was something more complicated and more useful, a team that was angry. Not at him, not at each other, but at the situation. Heller, who had been the first person he'd talked to and who had 17 years of security work behind her and a specific and detailed way of explaining exactly where the event plan had been inadequate, was the clearest example. She didn't want reassurance. She wanted to fix it. She'd been wanting to fix it since the morning after, and she'd been waiting for someone to ask her what she saw. He spent an hour and 40 minutes with her. He filled 6 pages of the legal pad. He walked out of that conversation with more usable information than the 3-week-old professional audit had given him. Because the audit had looked at systems, and Heller had been inside the building watching people. Park, the technical person Carver had mentioned, turned out to have a gift for access modeling. She could look at a credential log and identify behavioral anomalies with a pattern. Recognition that Adrian suspected was partly instinct and partly years of staring at data. He gave her the raw access logs from the 18 months before the incident and asked her to flag anything that didn't fit baseline patterns. She came back in 4 days with 11 anomalies, 2 of which were mundane explanations, and 9 of which formed a coherent picture of Fenn's access pattern, shifting gradually over a 6-month period as he prepared the groundwork for Werner's operation. 9 flags, 6 months of data. Nobody had been looking at any of it. He brought this to Victoria on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before his formal presentation was due. Not because it was urgent in a crisis sense, Fenn was in custody, the immediate threat was over, but because this was the kind of information he'd told her he would bring immediately, and keeping that promise mattered more to him than waiting for the right moment. She read through Park's analysis without speaking. Then she looked up. He was preparing for this for 6 months, she said. At least, possibly longer. The access logs only go back 18 months, and his pattern looks established before that. I had weekly meetings with Garrett Fenn for 6 months. I sat across a conference table from him and talked about budgets and personnel and the company's future. She said it with a flatness that was not absence of feeling, but containment of it. And he was already doing this. Yes. She set the papers down. I keep waiting to feel stupid about that. I don't. I feel angry, which is probably more useful. It is. I need you to build something that means I never have to feel this way again, she said. Not because I can't handle it, because the people in that building, the ones on the floor with their hands zip-tied, the ones in the storage room, they didn't sign up for this. They come to work. They trust that the structure around them is solid. She paused. That's what Fenn actually took from me, not the data. The certainty that I had built something people were safe inside. He held her gaze. I understand. I know you do, she said. That's why you're here. The formal presentation happened on a Friday morning, 3 weeks to the day from his first visit to the office on 32. He'd put it together over the previous 4 days, working late enough twice that the building's cleaning crew had started to recognize him, and the woman named Sandra, who did the 32nd floor, had started leaving an extra coffee near his door, which he found both unnecessary and genuinely touching. It was 47 pages. He'd never liked presentations with more than 20, but the scope of what needed changing required the space. He'd asked Carver to sit in. He'd asked Park to be available by phone if technical questions came up that he didn't have the exact data to answer in the moment. He'd prepared for the meeting the way he used to prepare for operations. Thoroughly, then again, looking for the thing he might have missed. Victoria read the full document before he presented it. She showed up to the meeting with the pages annotated in 3 colors of ink, which told him she'd read it at least twice. He walked her through it for 90 minutes. She interrupted 8 times, all of them good questions, 2 of them pointing to things he'd underdeveloped and 1 of them identifying an assumption he'd made about vendor credentialing that needed to be revisited because of a contractual constraint he hadn't been aware of. He noted all 3, said so, and moved on without getting defensive about it. When they finished, she sat back. It's good, she said. It's genuinely good. A pause. The intelligence function component, the upstream monitoring, the behavioral analysis. That's new territory for us. I know. Park can run the technical side. You need one more person for the human intelligence side. Someone who talks to people, watches for the social patterns that don't show up in access logs. That's a different skill set. Do you have someone in mind? He thought about it. Not yet. I want to be careful about that hire. Agreed. She looked at the document on the table between them. I want to implement this in phases. Start with credentialing and monitoring, run that for 60 days, then move to the intelligence function and personnel restructuring. That's sensible. The timeline on training is aggressive. I know. But it's achievable if we start the first cohort next week and keep the group small enough that I can actually assess instead of just lecture. Can you manage that on top of the oversight work? He thought about Mia's school schedule. Pickup was at 3:15, which meant he needed to be out of the building by 3 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He had worked around it so far. Victoria hadn't commented on it, which he appreciated, and Carver had started quietly scheduling team meetings in the mornings without being asked. Yes, he said, as long as the training sessions stay in the mornings. Done. She closed the document. I want to say something that isn't a business statement. He waited. I know what this cost you, she said, coming back into this kind of work. I don't take that lightly, and I don't want you to think I do. She paused, choosing the words. What you did 3 weeks ago in this building wasn't just tactical. You made a choice about what mattered to you. And then you made it again by walking in here on a Monday morning. She held his gaze. That's not something I can compensate you for, but I can make sure it means something. He thought about the coal in his chest, which had been burning differently for 3 weeks. Not out, not cooler, just aimed somewhere new. It means something if the structure holds, he said. That's the only version I care about. She nodded once, firmly. Then let's make sure it holds. He picked up his copy of the document and stood up. I'll have the Phase 1 implementation timeline to you by Monday, he said. Fine. And Adrian, he paused at the door. Go home on time tonight, she said. Whatever time that means for you. It's Friday. He looked at her for a moment. You too, he said. Something in her face shifted slightly. It was the particular expression of someone who had been given back a small, ordinary thing they had forgotten to keep. I'll try, she said. He went to get his daughter. Mia had good news about the field trip, which had apparently involved a natural history museum and a fossil that she described as extremely large, and this detail occupied the entire car ride home and most of dinner. He let it. He asked questions. The right questions. The ones that opened the story wider instead of closing it. And she talked with the full-body investment of a 7-year-old describing something that genuinely amazed her, her hands moving, her eyes wide. The particular joy of someone who has seen something new and wants to make sure the person across from them sees it too. He watched her and thought about 47 pages and behavioral baselines and access logs and the long, slow work of building something that didn't exist yet. He thought about Werner and zip ties and Carver in the dark corridor, and Park's 9 anomaly flags, and Sandra leaving coffee outside his door. He thought about a code that was a birthday and the way Victoria had said it, past tense, careful, the thing carried quietly. He thought about how much of a person's life is invisible to the people around them, and how much of his own had been invisible for years, and how different it felt now to be somewhere that the invisible parts were actually the point, the training, the instinct, the knowledge of how things break, and how to build them stronger. Mia had finished her account of the fossil and was now eating her green beans in the particular slow, negotiating way she had with vegetables she was willing to tolerate but not enjoy. Dad, she said. Yeah. Is the new job good? He thought about it honestly. I think it might be. Better than fixing panels? Different, he said. It's harder, but harder usually means more worth doing. She considered this, moving a green bean to the edge of her plate with great deliberateness. Miss Peterson says the hard things are the ones that make you better. Miss Peterson is right. I know. She ate the green bean with the resigned commitment of someone honoring a social contract. You should tell her that sometime. She likes when parents agree with her. He almost laughed. I'll keep that in mind. Outside the kitchen window, the street was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on, the quiet settling into the neighborhood like something familiar coming home. The refrigerator hummed. The get well card was still on the door, slightly crooked, the letters still emphatic. He sat across from his daughter and ate his dinner. The work was waiting for him on Monday. Tonight was this. The trial date for Garrett Fenn was set for the following spring, which meant that for several months his name existed in the company the way a bruise exists under clothing. Present, occasionally pressed against by accident, something everyone was aware of and nobody wanted to discuss directly. Adrian learned this about organizations. They don't heal the way people do. People have the option of processing something, sitting with it, eventually finding a place to put it down. Organizations carry their damage in their structure, in the protocols that got written after the failure, in the meetings that now happened that didn't happen before, in the way a room got quiet when certain subjects came up. The event at Halston Tower lived in the company the way significant events always live in the places they happened. Absorbed, present, reshaped by. His job, in part, was to make sure what it reshaped things into was something better than what had been there before. Phase 1 of the security restructuring went live 6 weeks after his presentation. Credentialing was the first thing. A complete overhaul of how access tiers were assigned, moving from role-based to need-based, which required 3 weeks of negotiation with department heads who were accustomed to access as a status symbol and were not immediately enthusiastic about giving it up. Adrian sat through those meetings without particular patience for the politics of it, but with enough awareness that he needed the department heads on board to make the system work, which meant listening to their objections, real ones and vanity ones both, and separating them without making anyone feel categorized. Heller ran the access audit. She was meticulous and unapologetic about it, which made her some enemies in the short term and the right ones. By the end of the first month, 43 credential sets had been revised downward, and 11 had been eliminated entirely, including 2 that had been grandfathered in from a company acquisition 4 years prior and whose original holders had not worked at Halston Group in 3 years. 3-year-old credentials still active, still valid, still in the system. Adrian put that specific detail in his monthly report to Victoria without additional commentary, because it didn't need any. Park's behavioral monitoring system came online in week 4. It wasn't glamorous work. It was data, patterns, the slow accumulation of baseline behavior against which deviations could eventually be measured. She had built a flagging system that sent daily summaries to Adrian and weekly summaries to Carver, and the first 2 months of it were mostly noise, legitimate anomalies, schedule changes, access patterns that looked unusual until you understood the operational reason behind them. He had expected this. The value of the system wasn't in what it caught immediately. It was in what it would catch 6 months from now, a year from now, when someone inside the organization started doing something that didn't fit who they were supposed to be. He explained this to Park one morning when she came to his office slightly frustrated that the system hadn't flagged anything significant in its first 3 weeks. "It's not broken," he said. "It's learning. I know. I want it to mean something. It already means something. It means that if someone in this building starts doing what Fenn did, we'll see it. Not after. While it's happening." He looked at her. "The value of prevention is invisible. That's what makes it hard to believe in. Nothing looks like it's working because nothing bad is happening." She considered that. "That's a frustrating way to measure success." "It is," he agreed, "but it's the honest one." She went back to her data. He went back to his. Carver had changed in ways that were incremental and therefore hard to point to exactly, but cumulatively significant. Some of it was the training. Adrian ran 4 cohorts through the new protocols over the first 2 months, and Carver was in all of them, not as a student, but as a co-facilitator, which put him in the position of having to explain things instead of just knowing them. Explaining a skill is different from having it. It requires you to understand why it works, not just that it works. And that requirement has a way of exposing the gaps that competence can hide. Carver found his gaps. He was not delighted about it, but he was honest about it, which was the thing that mattered. One Tuesday afternoon in February, he knocked on Adrian's door and stood in it with the particular expression of someone who had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it. "I want to do the roof assessment," he said. Adrian looked up. "The physical vulnerability assessment for the upper floors? Yeah, I know you were going to run it yourself, but I think I should do it." He paused. I know the building. I know the access points. And I need to... He stopped, started again. I stood in a corridor while you went into a dark room alone. I've been working with that for 3 months. I need to be the person who goes into the room. Adrian held his gaze. This isn't atonement, Carver. I know what it isn't. If you do the assessment because you feel guilty about the event, you're going to approach it wrong. You'll be trying to prove something instead of evaluate something. Those produce different results. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then how do I make them the same thing? You accept that you made the right call that night. You were protecting Victoria. That was your job, and you did it. Adrian set down his pen. What you're actually asking is whether you're capable of more than you showed. That's a different question, and it's a better reason to do the assessment. Carver absorbed this. Am I capable of more? Yes. But you're not going to know it until you stop asking and start finding out. He picked up a folder and slid it across the desk. Assessment protocol. Run it Thursday. Report to me Friday morning. Carver took the folder. He looked at it, and then at Adrian. You were going to give this to me anyway. I was waiting for you to ask for it. Carver nodded slowly. He turned to leave, then stopped. Why does that matter, whether I ask? Adrian thought about it. Because people who wait to be given responsibility treat it like something that belongs to someone else. People who ask for it treat it like something they own. He paused. I need people here who own what they do. Carver left. The assessment report on Friday morning was thorough, clear-eyed, and identified 2 access vulnerabilities on the 35th floor that Adrian had noted in his own preliminary walk and had not mentioned to anyone. Either Carver had found them independently or he'd found them first. Either way, the answer was the same. Adrian wrote 1 word in the margin next to each finding, good. Fenn's trial, when it came, lasted 9 days. Adrian was called as a witness on day 4. He drove himself to the courthouse, found parking 3 blocks away, sat in a plastic chair in a waiting room with water-stained ceiling tiles for 2 hours before he was called. The prosecutor's questions were direct and sequenced, and he answered them the same way. He did not dramatize, he did not editorialize. He described what he had observed, what he had done, and the sequence in which events occurred, and when the defense attorney attempted during cross-examination to suggest that his actions on the night of the event had been reckless and potentially endangered the civilians he claimed to be protecting, Adrian paused, looked at the attorney with the flat patience of someone who has been in genuinely dangerous places and has a calibrated relationship with the word reckless, and then calmly described, step by step, the specific decisions he had made and the reasoning behind each one. The defense attorney asked one more question and then sat down. Victoria testified on day 6. He watched from the gallery. She was composed in the way she was always composed, not cold, just structured, the composure of someone who had learned that feelings are most useful when they're not running loose in public. And she gave her account of the event with the clarity of someone who had lived with it for months and could now describe it with precision rather than distress. When she stepped down from the stand and passed the gallery on her way out, she didn't stop, but she looked at him, a brief, direct look, and he gave her a small nod, and that was enough. Fenn was convicted on all counts 11 days after testimony concluded: conspiracy, corporate espionage, and 11 counts of endangerment, 1 for each member of the security team that had been incapacitated. Werner had taken a plea deal months earlier and was serving reduced time in exchange for full cooperation. The man from the roof, whose name turned out to be Souza, which Adrian had not known until the trial, received a 7-year sentence. The third attacker from the server room got 6. Adrian read the verdict on his phone in the parking lot outside Mia's school, waiting in the pickup line. He sat with it for a moment. Then the line moved and he pulled forward and the doors opened and Mia came out in her yellow jacket with her backpack bouncing, and she saw his car and her face did the thing it did. The quick, uncomplicated brightness of a kid who is simply glad to see their parent. And he felt the verdict settle somewhere in him and stop being the main thing. She got in the car. How was your day? Good, he said. How was yours? We did fractions. She buckled her seatbelt with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been told many times to buckle her seatbelt. I don't like fractions. Most people don't at first. Did you? No, I was terrible at math until I was about 12. She looked at him with the skeptical appraisal of a child cross-referencing new information against existing belief. You do math stuff at work. Different kind of math. What kind? He thought about access logs and threat vectors and the geometry of a stairwell at night. Spatial math, he said, figuring out distances and angles, that kind. Is that on a test? Life test. She considered this. Is the life test hard? Sometimes, he said, but you can study for it. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked out the window at the passing street. He drove. In March, 4 months after the event, Victoria called him into her office on 34 for what she described as a quarterly review, but which he understood from her tone was something else. The office was different from the conference room where they usually met. Smaller, more personal, the kind of space that reflected the person who occupied it rather than the function it served. There were 2 framed photographs on the desk that he had noticed before but never looked at directly. He looked at them now, briefly. One was a landscape, mountains somewhere cold, and the other was a young woman in a graduation gown, laughing at something outside the frame. He sat down. Victoria came around from her side of the desk and sat in the chair across from him rather than behind it, which changed the geometry of the meeting immediately. The Phase 2 rollout is on schedule, she said. Procurement confirmed the monitoring infrastructure for floors 20 through 35 this week. We're 30 days ahead of where I expected to be. Park's been pushing the timeline. She's faster than I estimated. I know, I gave her a raise last week. Victoria crossed her legs and looked at him with the direct quality that he'd come to understand was not aggression, but a form of respect. She didn't look away from things, which meant she also didn't look away from people. I want to talk about your role going forward. All right? The structural work is largely in place. Phase 3 is personnel and culture, which is long horizon, 2 years minimum before it's genuinely embedded, not just policy on paper. She paused. I don't want you thinking of this as a contract position with a defined end. I want to talk about what it looks like permanently. He was quiet for a moment. What does permanently mean to you? It means you have a seat at the table when decisions that affect security are made. Not as a consultant who gets called in after the decision, as someone whose input shapes the decision. She leaned forward slightly. The board is creating a chief security officer position. I want it to be yours. He sat with that. Outside the window, the city was doing its afternoon thing, clouds moving in from the west, the particular gray light of a March afternoon that couldn't decide whether to commit to rain. That's a different kind of job than what I came in to do, he said. I know. It means being in a room with executives and board members and legal counsel and making arguments that aren't always going to be welcome. Yes. I'm not particularly good at corporate politics. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be good at the thing you're already good at and trust that I'll handle the politics around it. She held his gaze. I spent 11 years trusting the wrong person with too much access and not enough oversight. I'm trying something different. He thought about the 47-page document, about Park's 9 anomaly flags, about Heller pulling 3-year-old credentials from a system that no one had looked at, about Carver's assessment report with its 2 independent findings. He thought about what he had said to Victoria in this building 4 months ago, when she was standing at the edge of a stage and he was a contractor with a screwdriver who had just made a set of decisions he couldn't entirely explain. I'll take it, he said, under one condition. Name it. The role reports directly to you, no intermediary, no operations layer between my assessment and your decision-making. If I tell you something is wrong, you hear it in my words, not in a summary written by someone who translated it. That was already my intention. Then yes. She extended her hand. He shook it. The same firm grip as the first time, the same clean release. One more thing, she said. He waited. She reached into the desk drawer and put something on the table between them. A small keypad module neatly taped inside a clear evidence bag, the one he'd removed from the server room lock on the night of the event. He looked at it. The investigators returned it last week, she said, with the rest of the documented materials from the server room. She paused. I thought you should have it. He picked it up. It was lighter than he remembered, which made sense. At the time it had felt significant, the difference between a drive that got extracted and one that didn't, and objects that have been important in specific moments carry a kind of phantom weight. I don't need it, he said. I know, I didn't give it to you because you need it. She looked at him. I gave it to you because sometimes the thing you did matters more than anyone else in the room knows. And you deserve to have something that reminds you of it on the days when the work is slow and administrative and you've forgotten why it's worth doing. He held the bag for a moment. He thought about a dark room and a decision made in 4 seconds at a basement panel that had started a chain of events that led to this office, this conversation, this specific weight in his hand. He thought about how the significant moments in a life rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as a repair call on a Thursday evening, as a permission slip signed at a red light, as a door that needs to be opened before you've fully decided whether to open it. Thank you, he said. He put it in his jacket pocket. Victoria nodded once. Then she stood, which meant the meeting was over, and they both returned to the ordinary architecture of a workday afternoon. 6 months after the event, Adrian stood in front of a room of 11 people and delivered a training session on threat assessment that had nothing cinematic about it. It was 2 hours of methodology, case studies, and practical exercises involving floor plans and access logs, and the kind of slow, systematic thinking that kept crises from becoming necessary in the first place. At the end of it, Carver asked a question about pre-event intelligence protocols that led to a 20-minute tangent that went over the scheduled time and which Adrian let go because it was the right question and the room was engaged in the right way, which was more valuable than the schedule. Afterward, walking back to his office, he passed Park in the corridor. She had a printout in her hand and the focused expression she got when she found something in the data. Flagged something, she said, falling into step. What is it? Vendor credential. Engineering floor. Pattern looks like it's testing access limits. Small deviations, different times of day. Could be a glitch. Could be someone mapping the system. When did it start? 11 days ago. He stopped walking, looked at the printout. Get me the full access log for that credential going back to issue date, and pull the vendor contract it's associated with. Already printing. Good. He handed the paper back. This is what the system is for. Yeah. She looked at the printout. It's strange. I built the thing, but it still feels surprising when it actually works. That's not strange, he said. That's what it feels like when prevention does its job. You never quite believe it until it does. He went to his office and closed the door and started working the problem. There's a version of this story that ends with a dramatic resolution. Werner behind bars, Fenn sentenced, the building secured, the credits rolling over something that feels like conclusion. And those things were all true. They all happened. But the actual shape of it, the way it felt to the people inside it, was less like a conclusion and more like a shift. A before and an after that didn't have a clean line between them, but a slow accumulation of changed things. New protocols, repaired trust, a team that had been through something and come out knowing more about what they were capable of, which is not always comfortable knowledge, but is always useful. Adrian drove home on an ordinary Thursday in April with the radio on a station he didn't actively choose and the windows cracked because the weather had finally made a decision in favor of spring. He had a board presentation on Monday that he was mildly dreading because board presentations required a different kind of communication than he was naturally good at. More performance, less substance. The translation of technical truth into language that landed on people who were listening with the portion of their brain that managed liability rather than the portion that understood risk. He was working on it. Carver had told him diplomatically that his first draft sounded like a threat assessment, which was accurate and also not what a board needed to hear. He was rewriting it. It was slower than any other part of the job. Mia was at the kitchen table when he got home, which was her usual position at this hour, doing homework with the focused discontent of someone who had accepted the necessity of fractions and was not happy about it. Dad, she said, without looking up. Hey, what's 7/8 minus 1/2? He hung up his jacket. 3/8. She wrote it down, looked at it. How do you know that so fast? I've been doing this longer than you. That's not an explanation. Common denominator. Convert 1/2 to 4/8, then subtract. He sat down across from her. Show me the next one. She slid the worksheet across the table. He looked at it. Second-grade fractions with little illustrated pizza slices, which was a noble pedagogical effort and not how fractions existed in his actual life, but close enough. They worked through it together. She got 6 right and 1 wrong, and he walked her back through the wrong one without making it feel like a correction, which was something he'd gotten better at over time, finding the way into a mistake that didn't close the person down. When she was done, she put her pencil down and looked at him with the assessing quality she'd had since she was very small. "You seem different," she said. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Less tired, but not like you slept more. Like a different kind of tired." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, dark eyes, the drawing of a city still on the refrigerator, a new drawing of what appeared to be a horse underneath it, and thought about what it meant that she could read him clearly enough to notice the difference between kinds of tired. "I think I found something I'm supposed to be doing," he said. She considered this seriously. "Like a calling? Where did you learn that word?" "Miss Peterson. She said everyone has one." "Mrs. Peterson is pretty smart." "I know." Mia picked up her pencil again, tapping it against the table. "What's yours?" He thought about the keypad module in his jacket pocket, about Victoria's face when he'd said thank you and meant it in a way he hadn't expected, about Carver's assessment report and Park's flagged credential, and Heller, who wanted to fix things and had just needed someone to ask her how, about 41 people in a locked storage room who went home to their lives because something held. "Keeping things from breaking," he said. "Or when they do break, making sure something's there to catch people before they fall too far." Mia thought about this. Like a safety net. Something like that. "We made those in PE," she said. "Out of rope. They're harder to make than they look." "Yes," he said. "They are." She went back to her homework. He sat at the table and didn't immediately get up to do any of the things that needed doing. The mail, the board presentation draft, the laundry that had been waiting since Tuesday, and just let the kitchen be what it was. His daughter working, the light coming in through the window at the end of afternoon angle, the refrigerator with its drawings, and its one crooked get-well card that he had never taken down. He was not at peace, exactly. That would have been too clean a word for what he was. He still had the coal in his chest, the one that had been there since long before Thursday evening in October had changed the direction of his life. He still had nights where something from a different time came back in a way that didn't respect how far he'd come from it. He still had mornings where the simple act of dropping Mia at school felt like the most important thing he'd done in days, and he thought about all the parents who didn't get to do it, and the weight of that landed without warning. He was not at peace. But he was somewhere real, doing something that mattered, with people he had learned to trust and who had learned to trust him back. He was raising a kid who could read him better than most adults could, and who did fractions at the kitchen table and drew cities in crayon and asked questions that deserved honest answers. He had spent years trying to leave behind the man he'd been. What he understood now, sitting in a kitchen on an April evening with spring coming through the cracked window, was that leaving wasn't the right word. You didn't leave the things that shaped you, you redirected them. You found the place where the skills that had cost you the most could do the most good, and you built something there, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real things get built. Werner was in a federal facility upstate. Fenn was serving 9 years. The server room drive was locked and monitored and protected by a system that hadn't existed 6 months ago. 200 people had gone home from a Thursday evening in October, and most of them would never know all of what had happened to make that possible. And that was fine. That was actually the point. Adrian Cole had stopped trying to disappear from himself. It had taken longer than it should have, and the reason it finally happened was not a plan or a decision, but a moment. A door he'd opened in a corridor with a screwdriver in his hand, and the quiet certainty that someone on the other side needed him to. He reached over and moved Mia's pencil slightly to the left, so it wasn't on top of her worksheet. She didn't look up. "Thanks." "Yep." Outside, the evening was arriving in the unhurried way of April evenings, taking its time, not yet the long days of summer, but longer than they had been, the light holding on a little past when you expected it. He sat with his daughter and let it.